everyone, welcome to Solh Wellness. My name is Kavya Sharma and I'm the moderator for this session. We have four very special guests with us and I think introducing each one of them to you very shortly. So we have
Mr. Kapil Gupta, Mimansa Singh Tanwar, Ashiish V, Patil, and Shivani Dhillon.
So, first of all, I would like to welcome each one of you and thank you so much for joining us today for this interesting session. So, I'll start with the introduction from Mr. Kapil Gupta.
So, Mr. Kapil Gupta is a mental health activist and founder of the Solh Wellness app. He's also a parallel entrepreneur. Now we have Mimansa Singh Tanwar. Mimansa Singh Tanwar, MPhil in clinical psychology, works as a clinical psychologist with Department of Mental Health and Behavior Science, Fortis Healthcare. She is a cognitive behavior therapist working in clinical space using advanced based treatments with adolescents, parents, couples, and family. It's a pleasure to have you here, ma'am. Now we have Mr. Ashiish V. Patil. Ashish is a writer, producer, director, author, a proud autism dad, and a late diagnosed autistic himself. The former CEO of MTV India and CEO of Youth Films, Talent and Digital Originals at Yashraj Films. He is now the chief storyteller at Specials, a creative and a content hotshop. What a pleasure to have you here, sir, today. Now we have, last but not the least, Shivani Dhillon, an ex-BBC journalist, therapeutic storyteller, and founder of Shimveda Stories and Beyond, Down Syndrome Support Groups India, and has been working extensively with kids for the last many years. What a pleasure to have you here, ma'am. Now, we would like to move on to the questions with our panelists. So, I'll be asking you all a few questions and I hope you could answer it to us. So, the first question that pops up into my mind is, many times we think that mental health is like, the word mental health is something that relates to self help. What do you think about the term self help and what is your belief about it? Do you think mental health and self help are two words that work hand in hand?
So I think I think, and I come from a point of view of a woman, and I think women in our culture, in our society, in our country, there is no concept of self-help. The concept is only of giving. We've always heard that a woman is supposed to give, woman is supposed to look after everyone. That is our duty. I don't think we ever get to a point where we think of ourselves. And I've seen my mother do it. I've seen her do things like, sabzi kam pad gayi, so let me give it to the children first. I'll eat it with something else. And when you see your mother doing it, somehow I realized a part of that also came in me. And for a long time, many years, I have 3 children. I lived in a joint family. It was all about looking after the others first. It was only when I felt that I was falling apart. And it's only when that happens do most women realize that it's time to, do something about bringing joy and doing things which we want to do. I mean, as much as I want to look after my family and it gives me joy, but there are times when I'm reminded that before I'm a mother, before I'm a wife, I'm also Shivani. I think that is where we all need to understand that, especially the women, that it's all right to do the duty. It's all right to look after the family. It's all right to do that, but it's extremely important to look for that one thing that gives you joy, which doesn't have to do with anybody else but yourself. It could be, and I feel that going out for a cup of coffee is very temporary. It gives you that temporary joy, it gives you a high, but that doesn't last for long. There has to be something more meaningful, which gives you joy on a daily basis. And I think that's where women don't understand. And I think that's where we come to a point where we fall apart to realize that we need to do something.
I think I exactly agree with whatever points that I think we as women sometimes are born with the fact that, oh, we can adjust with these situations, and that is inbuilt with us, and we forget about taking care of ourselves. And as you said, it is extremely important to look after ourselves and to self care. And same question to you, Ashiish, sir. I would love to hear your viewpoint on that.
Shivani, so beautifully put, yeah, and I so agree with you. I think a classic like live example right now. Finally I've managed to convince my wife to take 5 days off. She's gone on an all-girls trip to Kashmir, early flight, red eye, but she had to wake up earlier so that I don't have to pack the lunchbox for my son. It's just classic, right? At the same time, what happens with guys, Shivani, is that just the way women have this default setting of मुझे सब संभालना है, guys almost have a stigma. कि नहीं यार ये थोड़ी ना हम तो सब ठीक है, हम तो मर्द हैं, and it's almost kind of looked down upon to get help. I think if you take a flight, also flight पे कहता है कि दूसरों की मदद करने से पहले कृपया अपना ऑक्सीजन मास्क पहन लें. And I think that is just so important. Honestly, therapy saved my life. Therapy and a bunch of other things. I mean, whatever your tools are for self-help and self-care. I think I heard a lovely line about how religion is for people who are scared of hell, and spirituality is for people who've been to hell and back. And I was like, man, that is so true. That is me. And I discovered Buddhism and a bunch of other things which I would have typically laughed at in the past, saying, "Ye kya aise thodi na hota hai." And those are things that actually really kind of rooted me there. I mean, honestly, they saved my life in a phase when, things were really dark. And I think you realize that some of these things are just so basic, so fundamental, और हमें किसी ने सिखाया नहीं है. अगर बुखार भी होता है, you know how to do a temperature check, सर पे हाथ रख देंगे हम or whatever, and there are home remedies for अच्छा ये ले ले, ये खा ले. But for any other, mental wellness issues, we don't know how to deal with it. अरे कुछ नहीं है, ठीक हो जाएगा. It's such an essential life skill. It's like throwing people in at the deep end, asking them to cook, but no ingredients, no utensils, no stuff, no recipe. अब तुम कक्का ही बकवास ही बनाओगे तुम. And I did my graduation in commerce, and at the end of my BCom degree, I didn't even know how to fill out a bank reconciliation statement. After my business school degree, I was learning econometrics, and I was like, I've never used it for a single day in my life. While things like self-care, etc., are just so fundamental, they're essential daily living skills, which are so essential for all of us to have, and we just don't do that. And I think what happens is and forget about that being essential as a daily life skill. When you look at the numbers, right, the fact that 1/4 of the world is it's disabled. That's 25% of the world. Right? That's a large population. The minute you put in mental health and invisible disabilities, autism, dyslexia, all of that, that number is staggering. Especially with the the stigma associated. Those numbers are probably. It's very likely that you know someone with autism and you don't even know it. It's very likely that when we are talking, unless I told you that I'm a late diagnosed autistic, you'd be like, क्या बात कर रहे? अच्छा, तू तो you look like चलो super achiever, CEO, फलाना ढिमकाना, ये कैसे हो सकता है? So those numbers are just so large, and forget anything else. I think from a pure play business standpoint, it's such a large gap for the community that you're leaving out over a fourth of your potential target audience. You're leaving out a very large chunk of your workforce when you're missing those pieces, and I think you're fundamentally incomplete as a person if you're not understanding or integrating this very, very large part of the population, etc. So I think just that self-help, self-care should be fundamentally part of curriculum. Should be part of conversation with families, with communities. That's when things will hopefully start moving, start changing for everyone. So for guys and girls both. Sorry, long answer. Kavya, that's me.
No, it was not long. It was something that I was really listening to. So I really expressed the answer. I think that we can cook up a recipe when we have it. Without having a recipe, I don't do something that without having a on that. Mimansa, what's your take on that?
Yes, agreeing to both the panelists who we have, Shivani and Ashiish, I think what we need to understand that when it comes to mental health, the very aspect of mental health has been so stigmatized for such a long time that the awareness, even though we have been talking a lot more about it, it's more like, since we are seeing it happening on social media, we believe we've been able to make a significant change. But the fact and reality is that still people do not seek help when it comes to mental health. The lack of awareness is still very much there. Accessibility, even though brilliant programs like Telemanas, the government has brought in, and telemental health has come in, it still requires a lot more of that pushing in the form of implementation and so many other levels that it requires for us to bridge the gap and to really say that, yes, we've arrived. We are obviously coming up with a lot better ways to handle mental health related concerns. When it comes to schools, mental health curriculum, a must, a need for the hour. And like what Ashish said, that self-help needs to be a part of the curriculum, I think self-help needs to be looked at as a life skill. Because when we talk about self-help in the form of, somebody on the ground, playground, passing on the ball from one player to the other, that's self-help. If another child is calling another one because I'm getting bored, let's do something, that's also self-help. If a teacher is doing something and helping a child, self-help. If as a parent I'm reaching out to my parent for some kind of a support, that's self-help. But when it comes to emotional distress, we don't seek help because we feel this is my problem and I should not be opening up and showing my vulnerability and exposing myself, my weakness. That aspect doesn't allow us to really express and share with what we are going through as a form of emotional distress. And we need to really ask ourselves, we talk about first aids, we have nursing rooms in schools, we have doctors associated when it comes to workplace mental health, we easily send them for PHPs and other things. But does mental health and evaluating stress comes in as a part of that? So even in schools, is a child able to know or recognizes where can I go when I have an emotional problem? Because the chances are that for any one of us, whether it is a younger one, whether it is you, it's me, it's some colleague, it's at workplace, we would be dealing with a lot more emotional difficulty vis-a-vis a physical difficulty at any given point in time. You may not have a physical wound today, but you may be going through an emotional wound today because you had a difficult problem dealing with, maybe because of a fight or loss of someone or something else that may be coming in your life. So yes, I think self-help needs to be a life skill. Self-help is something that we all need to recognize as an important aspect. Help seeking is how I would say it. Seeking help, because when you say seeking help, you are saying I'm actively taking the measure to reach out to someone who knows, who can provide me that particular help. So whether it is a parent, whether it is a colleague, whether it is somebody at the workplace, whether it is a mental health expert, counselor, it's reaching out to someone who can help you. So help seeking needs to be a life skill, and that will come in if we talk more and more and inculcate that as an integral aspect of mental health across the board, whether it is workplace, your schools, your organizations, different sectors.
Exactly. And I think we reach out to people and seek help. I think this is the biggest form of seeking self-help. So thank you so much for your answer, ma'am. Now we'll move to Mr. Kapil Gupta. What is your take on this?
So, Kavya, I have been talking about self-help and self-love, and I distinguish between the two for a very long time. And one of the things that I see is, I created this, what I call as a 16-hour theory, where I talk to people about the fact that every action and every decision that you do in your life, all day, every day, 16 hours a day, is driven by your mental health. The challenge is none of us work through within that framework. None of us really even realize when we are taking a particular action or a particular decision and think about the mental wellness implications of it. And, like Ashish talked about, we don't have the recipes and this, that, and the other. We have kind of created a language where we say we don't have the vocabulary and the tools and the framework for people to be able to seek self-help. And like Mimansa mentioned, it absolutely needs to be a life skill, and it absolutely needs to be inculcated within the core of our education system.
Exactly. I think you mentioned about the fact that the right vocabulary and tools and framework can help us seek the right help. And I would highly agree on you with that. As later Mimansa said about stigma, I would like to go back to the situation about stigma. rightfully said about the stigma, it's very important for us to remove stigma around mental health. As we move forward with the conversation, it's very important for us to touch on that.
So the term mental health is often interrelated with stigma. We all know that stigma and mental health is something that is related. Sometimes we want to feel about mental health, but we just can't due to the stigma that is attached to it. So what is your viewpoint about stigma and how can we remove stigma?
What is your take about stigma around mental health? So, Anu ma'am, what would be your answer to that?
So I have worked with parents who have children with disability. It's been over a decade now. And I think that's one group which is so preoccupied in looking after being the primary caregiver of their children that their own needs take a backseat. Not just that, I think if they express and if they come out in the open and say, okay, I need help, right? I think the perception of the third party will always be that, oh, you know what, she's not able to look after herself, तो अपने बच्चे का क्या ध्यान रखेंगे? क्या कर रहे होंगे अपने बच्चे के लिए? It's the judgment. We are so quick to judge. We are so quick to form perceptions, and we are all conditioned to do this as human beings, each one of us. And I think mothers, because usually mothers are the primary caregivers, they never reach out for help because they feel that if we reach out for help, we will be failing our child. They are refusing to accept that there is a need to seek help. I'll share something with you. It was a long time back, about 4-5 years back, and I've been a very, fairly strong parent. But there was a moment when I had something which I realized later was an anxiety attack. And I felt like I was having a heart attack and I thought I was going to die. That's how I felt. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what was happening, but it was only later on that I realized that it was something which is called probably an anxiety attack. And it made me take a step back and look at things with a very, very different perspective. And I realized, like Ashiish said, कि पहले अपने आप को ऑक्सीजन लगाना होता है. And I realized कि अगर मैं ही ठीक नहीं हूँ, how in the world am I going to look after my child? And that's when I took things in my own hands and I said, okay, no, let me do something which brings me joy, which is away from my family, which is not a responsibility, which is just purely giving me bliss and nothing else. So I feel that parents in the disability community is one section I've worked with and one section I've seen they do not reach out for help.
On the note, when we are talking about parents, Shivani ma'am, you just said as a mother, sometimes a person feels, oh, if my child has some disability or something, you feel like you fail as a mother. And that stigma that goes around the head is sometimes that stops the mother from reaching out for help. What should the mother do at that particular time? What should she exactly do? Because she's traumatized about the situation and somehow she might stop the child from seeking for help. She feels, oh, if he's going to take some help, I'm saying it out loud, it's a problem. So what should the parent do?
I think the best help a parent can get is from another fellow parent. I think no matter what the doctor tells you, whatever the NGO tells you, whatever your therapist tell you, it will not work. It will only work when you talk, when you share with a fellow parent who's had a lived experience. And I think that's when you realize you're not alone. There's so many other mothers, there's so many other parents who are also dealing with similar situations, who are on the same journey like you. And you feel, all right, if they're smiling and if they are going, their child is now grown up or whatever, especially with senior parents, तो फिर हम क्यों नहीं कर सकते? And a parent will always know what to say, what is the right thing to say, and how to put it across to the parent so that the parent is able to accept the child. So I cannot speak enough of what we call the support group. Even with mental health, there are so many support groups. For alcohol, there's people who got alcohol addiction, there are support groups. The same way, support groups for parents who are dealing with children with disability is extremely, extremely important.
I think what you said, support groups is extremely important for the parent because you have a place to talk about what you exactly feel and you have people who are going through a similar situation and that somehow you feel comfortable. Oh, I'm not the only one who's going through. So I think support group is a very important factor that touches in, and I highly agree on that. Moving on to Ashiish sir, you work with youth a lot and you know what are our challenges. You must have seen it sometimes with your journey with MTV and people who want to act as roadies, and you know their journey and the things that go behind the mental health at that particular time. How would you feel and how would you suggest certain ways to remove stigma around the youth?
Uh, yeah, I think fundamentally जो चीजें हम जिनके बारे में हम जानते नहीं ना, what we don't know, what we don't understand, that's what you usually fear, and that's where discrimination comes. That's where also I think fundamental start is just the normalization of everything, of a conversation, and it, I think like Shivani mentioned, it's never going to be. It doesn't take a village; it takes a country. In cases like this, right? It's never going to be just the parents. It's going to be the parents, the school, the peer group, the community. It needs to come together and really work together to essentially do this. I think I realize, given the world that I come from, that media and entertainment plays such a big part. My understanding when Rishan was first diagnosed, my son, that's almost a decade and a half back, कि autism के बारे में कभी सुना नहीं था. सब बताया तो my reference was अच्छा रेन मैन, डस्टिन हॉफमैन, अरे ये तो लॉटरी लग गई, अब इसको मैं सूट पहना के कसिनो ले जाऊंगा और पैसे बनाऊंगा. People like, तो बेवकूफ हो गया. It doesn't work like that, you moron. And then even right now when I talk about autism, people are like, okay, तारे जमीन पर. I'm like, oh, okay, that's dyslexia. Or it's, okay, my name is Khan, the Shah Rukh Khan. It's like, okay, yeah, but or Big Bang Theory and Sheldon. And I'm like, I'm glad that's a conversation point, but to summarize all of that into one character is not really accurate. But I'm glad the conversation is starting, and you realize what a big role media and entertainment play in creating awareness, creating acceptance, creating appreciation. The challenge over there, Kavya, is that I'll give you some crazy data points. All right, we are the largest producers of movies in the world as India. Right, साल में हम लोग 1000 से 1200 फिल्में बनाते हैं across languages. Hindi, Punjabi, Tamil, Telugu, all of that put together, right? Some of them are really shitty, some of them I'm responsible for, so I will digress, put that aside for a moment. We've been making films since like 1930s, so आज की तारीख तक हमने तकरीबन 45,000 फिल्में बनाई हैं, 45,000 films, okay? So soak that in. Now, if you talk about films which have disability representation, in whichever percentage, चाहे primary character हो like तारे ज़मीन पर, या सेकेंडरी कैरेक्टर हो, वो अमिताभ के पीछे फरीदा जलाल व्हीलचेयर में बैठी है, I'm even bringing in physical disability. So even if it is हीरो की बहन, हीरोइन का दोस्त, or that kind of thing, out of 45,000 films in the last 90 years, guess the amount of films which have had disability representation. Less than 300. Okay, so that's just one crazy data point. Let me kind of give you a little more color on that. Now, if I were to talk about characters portrayed with disability, how many of those were played by people with actual disabilities? 11.
That is best.
11. Okay, so it's just, forget about underrepresentation, it's not represented. That's one fundamental gap. Two, whatever is represented, unfortunately, is even more dangerous because it's misrepresentation. There's the whole, agar aap reality show dekhoge, those Indian Idol, there's the whole pity porn, as we call it in the community, the whole bechara narrative. वो सडनली वायलिन बजने लगेगा, अंधी माँ, विधवा बहन. It's like, oh my god, what is going on? It's depressing. Or the advertising and the feature film biopic narrative, which is the inspiration porn, as we call it. That यार पैर नहीं है फिर भी एवरेस्ट चढ़ गया, ये नहीं है फिर भी ये कर गया. Or the worst, which is just insensitive. And a couple of these people are people I know well, like a Rohit Shetty or whoever. It's just insensitive when you do Tushar Kapoor in Golmaal and you do this whole, you're using disability or mental health as a gag or as a tool for humor, and it's just, those are the fundamental things, given the impact that they have, for that conversation to start, for it to be normalized, for it to begin. Minute that conversation starts happening, minute it's normalized without a spotlight, is where I think acceptance will become, so to speak, easier. I think that's one fundamental place. Two is the education space, like we spoke about. It's a life skill, like we were chatting, right? I think it needs to be, I think like Mimansa also spoke about, I think seeking help is a life skill. यार अगर मुझे होमवर्क में कुछ समझ में नहीं आ रहा, आई विल नॉट थिंक ट्वाइस एंड से ट्यूशन चाहिए या हेल्प चाहिए. क्यों नहीं करते? I think that's another second piece that needs to come in on the education side, and I think just the community plays such a big part. I think like Shivani spoke about, I think one of the underserved communities is caregivers. यू नो कि यार वो you're so वो अपना ऑक्सीजन मास्क लगाना तो हम भूल ही जाते हैं ना. एंड एट टाइम्स दैट coming from someone with a lived experience is fundamentally different, and I'll tell you what I mean, right? Like a lot of my friends, my colleagues and my batchmates, their kids are now like going to university, and that's a dunya which I don't understand only. वो essays लिख रहे हैं, GMAT हो रहा है, ये हो रहा है. I'm like ये क्या है? I'm उस दुनिया से मैं इतना अलग हूँ. But when someone else, you know, who's an autism mom or an autism dad, when they talk about it, then you just understand that they get me, you know, or they kind of get you. So at times, I mean, we have some of these groups like a forum for autism or whatever. At times you could just put it out saying, dude, it's been a really rough day. Rishan kind of spat on someone. You know, so like, dude, I just need cheering up. Can I hear some shitty jokes? And then people will be like, they'll start a chain which will be like, you know, you're an autism dad when? And then people will start a bunch of string of silly jokes. And at times you just need that. So I think, so those are the pieces. And one very big piece that helps do that is humor. I think वो भी एक लाइफ स्किल है. आई थिंक ह्यूमर जस्ट गिव्स यू द एबिलिटी टू ड्रॉप ट्रूथ बॉम्ब्स, टू ड्रॉप फायरवॉल्स एंड से स्टफ एंड डील विद स्टफ which just makes life easier. So I think these are 2 or 3 things which would probably help kind of build out that acceptance, normalize things, and hopefully make things a little easier and certainly a lot more fun.
I think about what you said about the movies, we have our form of understanding. That is me, but now I know what is dyslexia because I saw it in the movie and things like that. And if we have more movies which are on mental health, it will help. And the fact about support groups, as Shivani also mentioned, now if I hear both of you, I understand the importance of it now. How extremely important is it and how helpful it can be. So, Mimansa ma'am, over to you now. So, what is your understanding about the stigma around mental health? You are in the fraternity and you keep on dealing with situations like that, and you meet people on the day-to-day basis. So, what is your take on that stigma around mental health?
I think stigma undoubtedly comes through stereotype, and in some way or the other, we all live those stereotypes. We conform to those stereotypes. In any position or role that I am in, whether I'm a parent, whether am I a peer, whether am I a work colleague, or whether I'm a co-worker or I'm a leader, we all live those stereotypes because we internalize those things. We want to confirm it because that's how the society has brought them into picture. That's what we've known. That's what we've believed. And the only way to break those stigmas is when we are able to break those stereotypes. So stereotypes can be broken when there is more awareness, and can also be broken when you recognize that somewhere the belief system that has been embedded in you during your growing up years, you recognize is somewhere confining you to go beyond a certain boundary to normalize things that can be normalized. You break that. You take that first step to break it. You take that first step to open up about it. You take that first step to see what is it that you can do to not allow the stigma to perpetuate. And again, different sectors have a different role to play. Very important, yes, media certainly has a big role to play, because when we look at different mediums on how even early years, the information still goes to people in a way where either it's radio in smaller sections, or it's television, or different segments. And while media has started to play a positive role, and a lot of stigma used to be was continuing to perpetuate because of the portrayal that was there of mental illnesses. When you look at some of these old film stories where an individual would be shown in a disheveled, vegetated, violent, dangerous space, that actually became the perception of people living with mental illness for a very long time. And it's only now that we've been able to somewhat come out from that space, but now sadly it has gone into more entertainment. And in either ways, what we are losing is the sensitivity and the dignity that we are now talking about it, and which is why the theme for World Mental Health this year is that mental health is a universal human right. So when you talk about a human right, you can't compromise on dignity, you can't compromise on respect, you can't compromise on sensitivity in any which way. So portrayal, our own conversations when we have amongst our own peer group, our sensitivity, our non-judgmentalism, our empathy needs to be there at all times. And empathy, compassion and sensitivity needs to be part of our core value system that we need to just practice. Mental health cannot exist without that. And if we are a part of the society, we have to practice these values. We keep on preaching these to our younger ones, but we can't preach it unless we don't practice it. So the next time your child comes to you talking about this particular friend of mine did this to me, rather than saying, oh, you go back and do the same, that's not empathy. And that's what we are teaching them then. So if we want to be, we hope and we always desire that there is a society which is sensitive, which is empathetic, which has a certain value system. We just need to start practicing it in our day-to-day lives.
Thank you so much for that answer, Mimansa ma'am. Now I would like to move to Mr. Kapil Gupta. So what is your take about stigma around mental health? You keep on talking about it as a mental health activist. So what is basically your take? What do you take it as?
See, I think the first place where a lot of stigma needs to be removed is for people, the caregivers. I mean, Ashiish and Shivani both talked about the caregivers. See, the humor is always going to remain in society. The stigma is always going to remain with people who have never had to experience it. While we can continuously, incrementally keep changing and making minor improvements on it, I think where there is a huge need is for the caregivers to actually themselves remove more stigma from their heads. I think, and that is where Shivani and Ashiish both talked about the role of the support group. In my view, I have seen support groups as perhaps the most important tool for them. The challenge is many times we have our kids or, our relatives, our friends, some people who are very close to us for whom we are caregivers. And our challenge is we think this is what this person is doing and nobody else has to go through this. Nobody else has to face this. Just being in that, peer support group for you to realize, well, it's not just my child with autism who has this particular problem or who fidgets, who has, this kind of a reflection, who has this kind of behavior. Knowing that other people in the community have that as well, I think is an incredibly important tool. For many people, I see the problem is more starting with acceptance. I mean, and I talk about this in my mental health workshops. While we remove stigma in mental health, most of the times I see stigma removed saying, hey, anybody can have a mental health disorder except me and my kid. And, at that level, life alters, life changes. So I think for the caregivers to do that acceptance and, like how people like Ashiish kind of have built a lifestyle, have kind of accepted, have kind of are working through the system and are looking at how can they be not just for their kid, but can be more empathetic as a society overall. I think that's where the conversation of stigma first needs to start. And that support group first needs to be provided to people. And, that's something that, I'm very passionate about and I'm very interested in creating across variety of different sorts of disorders, variety of different sorts of issues. Also in this, I want to add that stigma around mental illnesses and stigma around mental wellness or emotional health need to be distinguished a little bit as well.
Really true about what you said, how important it is to remove the stigma around it. And let's move on to the next question. The next question that I'm going to ask to each one, if you had to really conjecture add into it, so let's see how you take that. So,
We often talk about mental health as a rich man's problem. Do you believe is it a rich man's problem or is it like for both? It's for poor and rich, because we generally see that people who are rich, they have a lot of money and they have all means of living a luxurious life. What is something that might bother them? What do you think about it? Is there anything that the rich might also fear, or is just a belief that people who are rich don't get mental health problems because they have everything to stay happy?
what is your take? Do you think it's a rich man's problem or is it like a both side issue or what is it? So Ashish, I'd like to take your take on that first.
I think ये तो बड़ा अजीब concept है यार कि that it's the parallel of saying that only tall people bump their heads. ऐसे थोड़ी ना होता है. I mean, the likelihood of that happening is because you're taller, you'll bump into a wall is higher, but that's not true. And I'll give you two examples of that. There was a very talented boy I used to manage called Sushant Singh Rajput. You would think guys hell successful, broken out from a small town, television se feature films. He was making a lot of money. He was super popular, super successful. But I remember, having conversations where he was saying, "Sir, chemical locha dimag mein help." Literally he was quoting dialogue from Munna Bhai, and I was like, "Man, you just need to get help. And there's no problem. Just get some help." So be it their so-called successful, famous, popular. And there was another very interesting project I was doing at the same time. It was India's first transgender band. It was a bunch of people from the transgender community. We created something called the Six Pack Band, who was singing. So that whole stigma of LGBTQ at that stage, it still continues to an extent, right? So we had curated a band with these people, and we had people like a Hrithik Roshan, etc., performing with these guys and all of that, right? So here's a bunch of people who've, can you imagine the kind of pressure they've gone through when they've come out? There was one beautiful girl in the band called Komal. She was earlier Kamlesh. When she came out, basically a small, conservative, lower middle class Gujarati family in Borivali in Mumbai, which is like a suburb. And her father had basically told her that, मेरे दो बेटे थे, आज से मैं सोचूंगा एक बेटा मर गया. So can you imagine what kind of stuff you're kind of coping with at the other end of the spectrum? So yes, in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there'll be very basic, यार पहले खाने को मैं ठीक करता हूँ, बाद में सोचूंगा. But I think some of these things probably even come before, food and water. I think if your headspace is just not wired right, I think the kind of impact that you won't even know whether you're thirsty. You won't be able to wrap your head around that. So I don't think, mental health discriminates based on socio-economic backgrounds. It'll impact everyone equally. Each one will have their own different sets of things to cope with and deal with. Your tools available to you might be different. Someone with a better socio-economic background and probably education may have a greater access. At the same time, may have a greater stigma कि यार हमारे society में क्या लगेगा. At that other end of the spectrum, you're like, you don't really care because, maybe you're at that stage where you're saying, यार क्या फर्क पड़ता है? Anyway, हमारी लगी पड़ी है. So then you don't mind getting it out there, and the community is probably bonding closer together to help out each other. And that transgender community is so solid. It's so goddamn tight. They're like, they're sisters. They hang together. They're watching out. Hey, me ahe na. That whole vibe, which I got goosebumps still talking about it. And maybe I remember when we put out that first music video with these people. This was 24 hours, and this is like 2016. Okay, so this is, forget Amazon and Netflix and all launching. Jio had not launched. Like Sehwag Ki Maa had not happened. So to get 1 million views at that time on YouTube was massive. So this video exploded. I remember getting calls from the likes of, Hrithik and all saying, yaar, ye kaise ho gaya? 1 million views, 24 days on a band which has 6 transgender folks. And it just exploded, all right? And I remember Komal getting a call from an unknown number saying, yaar, bahut samay ho gaya, ghar aaja, saath mein khana khayenge. And it was her dad after 13 years. Man, it's just hardcore stuff. So at times you just need that kind of support or peace, and which her community offered her. So like I said, I don't think mental health or challenges differentiate based on socio-economic or any background. Gender, orientation, money, ability, disability, wo nahi dikhta. I think your tools to cope with it, your support group to cope with it may kind of differ, but everyone has their own sets of issues. नहीं तो यार क्या problem थी? Yeah.
So Shivani ma'am, I was asking, what is your take about, is it a rich man's problem, or what is your perspective on this?
I definitely don't think it is, contained for or specially designed for some one particular community or strata of the society. I think it's about what's fundamentally important to us, what's our core, right? And that is there for each one of us. We are all humans first before we become rich and poor, or before we become, belong to a particular community. Yes, like Ashiish said, the stress levels could be different. The types of stress is different. एक गरीब आदमी को खाना है, उसको कमाना है, that is his priority. A rich man has got everything, but has no family, has no bonding, has no love, right? Has achieved everything, and now like, what is my purpose? Paisa to aa gaya, right? So it changes, but I think the need can happen in any society, can be for any human being. I do feel that when it comes to the middle class, I was talking to somebody yesterday. I think middle class is one of those very, very confused kind of a bracket. They don't know where they are. They want to be somewhere, but they're not really. They don't want to be. I mean, they're confused whether they want to be rich and they worry about losing out on the value, or I mean, it changes. So I think with the middle class, asking for help is actually the most toughest. And they are the ones who are, I feel, somewhere having issues on multiple levels. वो बच्चे को भी बहुत अच्छी पढ़ाई देना चाहते हैं, है ना, वो पैसा भी कमाना चाहते हैं. They are doing for their parents also because that's their value system. They want to be in a joint family, and they want to. The woman of the house wants to break the shackles and move out of the house and start earning. So I think the stress is on multiple levels for a middle class family. But having said that, I think the need for better mental health is there in everybody, irrespective of where they come from.
Exactly.
I think that's so, sorry to interrupt, but Shivani, that's so nicely put. This middle class ka thing, I'm half Maharashtrian, okay? So they always say that you can take, the Maharashtrian out of a middle class locality, but you can't take the middle class locality out of the Maharashtrian. Okay, so it's just inbuilt into your system, and it's so true, right? कि अगर आप अमीर हो तो you got like अरे बहुत है मेरे पास क्या खोऊंगा. आप गरीब हो तो like you have nothing to lose anyway. वो middle में is where you get sandwiched. That's where that fear of लोग क्या कहेंगे, लोग क्या सोचेंगे, ये क्या होगा, वो क्या होगा is what messes with your head kind of the most, So it's in that sense, the community that kind of struggles the most, if at all, from a socio-economic standpoint, that no, you can't do this or you can't say that. So it's so true. Lovely. Very beautifully put. So I felt it. So
Mimansa ma'am, what's your take on this?
I think when it comes to, we need to understand the basis of mental illness for us to be able to really say whether it impacts any one person. Biological aspect cannot be ignored at all. Like any other physical illness, mental illness also happens because of biological factors. Now, whether it is your genetics or whether it is your neurotransmitters, one has to understand that plays a role. Then is the social aspect. And yes, for each and every one, the social factors would differ. You come from a poor social economic background, finances, challenges, those would be different to somebody with a completely different background, to somebody coming from a different professional background even. So for everyone, the social factors may differ. And then is the aspect of what can I do over here? My own psychological factors. We may sometimes be naturally have our ability to sort of deal with the problem a lot more, then we reach out for help. For others, it may be a little more challenging because I may be struggling with a particular skill, and which is where we also need to look at the solution. The solution is that if you have a mental illness, you go to a mental health expert for your medical help. You go to a counselor or a psychologist for the psychological help. And as a society, all of us play a role as in the form of providing psychological first aid to each and every one. And which is where your triangle completes. That if this is the triangle where there are three segments, there is a problem. This is the solution at all three triangles, and which is where all 3 points in the triangle, and which is what we need to understand. So yes, mental illnesses do not discriminate. We do. And that happens because of lack of awareness. We still do not believe that it happens because of a medical cause, medical illness. We don't see mental illness as a medical illness still. And which is why we still keep giving those tips of just do yoga and you'll be fine. Just go for a walk and you'll be fine. And just wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning and correct your routine and you'll be fine. Keep your headspace, think positive. All of those things need to be done, obviously, because they are significant aspect of our lifestyle. Lifestyle helps us maintain a good mental health, but it doesn't resolve or is the solution only to your mental illness. Mental illness solutions would be if you take the right treatment at the right time, and which is where right knowledge, early identification, and timely intervention is something which is important.
exactly as rightfully said, mental health in individuals is important. And now I would like to move on to Mr. Kapil Gupta, and I would like to know your take on this situation.
So, Kavya, let me say, while mental health, of course, does not distinguish, but let me at the same time say the manifestation of mental health issue across various spectrum of people does differ quite significantly. For people that are on the lower strata, for them, a lot of right, and probably sometimes rightly so, a lot of life is purely about survival. They are worrying. Some of the people have to worry about where would I put the next, not just the next meal on the table, that would be you are going to the bottom of the pyramid. But even if you go to middle class, where would I get that air conditioner when it is hot? Or where would I get, that organic food that I so wanted to get versus the normal vegetable that I'm buying today, and variety of other things. So the manifestation of mental health across various communities does definitely differ quite significantly when you move across people. Also, the education level has a huge role to play. There are communities where it is very acceptable, and Ashiish was talking about transgenders, so let me go in that layer only. There are communities where being an LGBTQ is extremely acceptable now. You can go to countries where it is actually in vogue. Or you can even go to countries where being an LGBTQ actually gets you the reservations versus being devoid of getting something. So that kind of a framework would exist in the society. So there is a differentiation when you go across the various spectrums. However, you have to look at mental health issues in terms of, like Mimansa was saying, biological, chemical, social, and behavioral. The biological and chemical issues will happen everywhere. They are not based on where you were born, how you were born, what your parents do, what your economic or social strata or whatever else is. They would be there. The access to what they can do about it differs. We all can think about our childhoods back when we were all living in an era, and all of us are of the same age. Of course, leave Kavya aside. We all have grown up into an era when mental health issues were very stigmatized, totally not acceptable. And today, I ask people to sit and think about that one guy that was in your class that actually had ADHD. Or that one guy that was in your class that actually had autism, and you just couldn't like really even think about it at that point of time.
Yeah, on just mental health, Mr. Kapil Gupta, I would like to ask another question. As I know that you have
Kavya, just 1 second. I think Mimansa has a point to add.
Yeah, sorry, Mimansa, I'm cutting you in.
I just wanted to add one aspect of normalizing reaching to a mental health expert as well. If we have a cardiac problem, we never say just go take a walk or run and it'll be fine. You go to a cardiologist. If you have a tooth problem, you don't say eat light and it'll be fine. The pain will go away. You do go to a dentist to seek treatment for that. So the treatment aspect needs to be really looked at it in that sense. Unless that doesn't come in, we'll keep giving our here and say, what you call as churans to people, which doesn't really work because that's not scientific. So you have to really understand the scientific aspect of why you need to go to a mental health expert to seek help over there and start your treatment per se.
So, thank you for that point. Moving on to Mr. Kapil Gupta.
In few years since you have started working in the field of mental health, and you have been working on an app which is dedicated to mental health. So what made you basically start Solh Wellness?
For most people, the story of starting something, specifically, tech startups, the story is I was waiting for a cab, I couldn't get a cab, and, I started Uber. I wanted to get food, I couldn't, and I started Zomato. I have absolutely no such mental health story. A couple of years back, I really saw something shift. Really something shift. I used to run a digital marketing agency. Most of the people that used to work for me were between the ages of 20 to 30, and I saw their life get altered. Words like toxic environment, words like work-life balance, words that were not in the dictionary earlier or were there just, on the sideline somewhere, became the center part of their life. I at that point of time knew something needs to be done. And I had been thinking for a fairly long time about what's the next thing that I do. And you could say they married together. Some people also call this as my midlife crisis. That I wanted to do something larger than life and I jumped into it. That may also, by the way, have a role to play in the decision. So, but as I was saying earlier, when I started this, I was thinking about what is it people are missing. And I said, every action, every decision making, this is really what started this. Every action, every decision in an individual's life is driven by mental health. But they don't look at it that way because they miss the vocabulary, the tools, and the framework. So I thought, how about we create a platform through which we can provide this vocabulary, tools, and framework that also takes care of what Mimansa was talking, which is normalizing people getting access to mental health. So if they have the vocabulary, if they have the tools, and the tools we categorize as self-help tools, so tools people can use by themselves, community support tools where they are able to participate in support groups, where they are able to do journaling, where they are able to interact with other people, and then expert services where they are able to get a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and we also provide allied therapy services. So the conversation really started not as I want to do this. The conversation really was a conversation that led to creation of Solh Wellness platform as it is right now. And then once we started it, while we were creating it, we said it has to be, mental health has to be looked upon as a fundamental right. That's where we started. And then, Mimansa, you were talking about this year's theme as universal human right. So we changed our communication also from fundamental right to universal human right. Even today, we provide the platform for free to people. And then there is a subscription model where we provide customized capability to corporates and also a measurability dashboard through which they can, across teams, across locations, really delve into data around mental wellness of their constituency group and then, create optimization. So for me, it's not, I decided I want to do this. It was a conversation, a journey that over a period of time led to Solh Wellness platform the way it is now.
Thank you so much for that answer, Mr. Kapil Gupta. Now I would like to move on to Shivani, ma'am.
Your work includes using traditional storytelling and it helps for people with intellectual disability. How has this concept of traditional storytelling helped you and helped others?
So I used to use a lot of stories with my daughter, and especially when it came to difficult behavior. Stories were a good distraction for her if she was finding it difficult to transition from one activity to the other, or if they were, she decided to just sit on the floor of the mall because her brain has just frozen and she's not processing any information or instruction that I'm giving her. I would quickly switch to a story. And this happened many times. I mean, I remember once she decided that she wanted to, she was wearing a hoodie and she took a backpack and she decided she has a parachute and she wants to jump from this little ledge just outside our window. And everybody had tried and she was a little on the heavier side, standing just on the edge. And nobody could take the chance because she would have jumped. So I think I was not at home and I came back and I did not give her any instruction. I didn't say, okay, you know what, Shreya, you're going to fall, you'll get hurt. Look, everybody is watching. And you know how parents, we can keep going on and on. I just went to her and I started a story and I said, you know what happened, Shreya? While I was driving the car, this little rabbit came and the little rabbit said, where is Shreya? I want to play with Shreya. And I started building my story and her eyes were locked with mine and I held her hand and I gradually pulled her away. I mean, there were a lot of instances like this where I have used story to address behavior, to explain concepts, good touch, bad touch, private space, public space, what is sex, all these things have been taught through stories. But having said that, stories are also a lot of fun, right? When you listen to a story, it works on a very, very subconscious level. When you're listening to stories, they become part of who you are. They become part of you. And you absorb the story. So it's also therapeutic where you're building trust, you're building that environment of fun where children loosen up and they do things which otherwise in other therapy sessions they would have never done. imagine, I mean, told a story about, some chapati and some king who's very fond of eating chapati. And after the storytelling session, I told all these adults with disability, some were non-speaking autistic individuals as well. And I said, let's make a roti. We're all going to make a roti. This was an online session. And, one of the boys who had severe sensory issues used to always wear gloves because that environment had been created and there was a lot of fun. He removed his gloves and he actually made and rolled out a roti, which is like a shocker for the mother as well. But these are some of the things which made me realize that, stories are working. And this is with children or with people with disability. But when it comes to parents, I think stories have a huge impact. And I think even psychologists and psychiatrists use stories when they're trying to motivate their patients as well. And there's a little, very small story that I use. It's about Hanumanji. Hanuman had forgotten all his powers because he was troubling all the rishis so much. So one of the rishis gave him shrap and said, you're so proud of all your powers of flying away and, doing all these magical things. You are from today going to forget that you have all these powers. And when his mother came running to the rishi and said, you can't do this, he's little boy, and you don't know he's the Vayu Putra and you've done this to him. So rishi says, I have already given the shrap. Once the shrap has been given, I cannot take it back. But now that you're all pleading, all the devs and the devis and everybody had come, he said, okay, I'll say one thing. When a very intelligent, very wise human being, very wise person will remind Hanuman of his powers, he'll remember everything. And that's what happened when Ramchandraji was standing on the coast and somebody had to go to Lanka to find out where is Sita. Everybody said, it's too far and how are we going to go? And then that's when Jambavan reminded Hanuman and said that, he was the wise bear. And he said, go, you have the power to fly. And that's how Hanumanji remembered that he can fly. And that is one of the stories, not just all, one of the stories that I use with parents when I remind them that you all have the power to look after your child and look after the child to the best of your abilities. There's nobody in the world who can look after your child better than you can. So stories, when they hear this story, it's like something happens from within. And, even for us, when we're looking at these little reels on Instagram and you hear the story, motivating and inspiring story of someone and you feel like, acha, agar wo kar sakte hain, to hum kyun nahi kar sakte? And, this story is actually, there's something called a Hanuman complex, which was developed. This idea of Hanuman complex was developed by a very well-known psychiatrist who was from Chandigarh. And now these stories are also being used by, psychologists and psychiatrists. So I think stories have a very, very important place in everybody's life. It's just that art is, people don't believe in that anymore. But trust me, stories have a great, great influence on people.
I would highly agree about the fact that story does play an important part, because when I was a little girl and my grandmother used to tell me a lot of stories, and now I'm 22 and I still remember each and every story. So yeah, it does have an impact on my mind about all these little stories and some lessons in life. Yeah. So Ashiish, my next question is to you.
In your experience with talent management, you come across with a lot of actors, people who aspire to be actors someday. What advice would you like to give them? What can they do to take care of your mental health? And there's a lot of pressure that is attached on being an actor someday in life. So what advice would you like to give them, or any tips or tricks that they can use to just have a better mental health?
I think, like I think we've been chatting, right? And of course, this pressure everywhere. What happens is with the entertainment business, especially if you're in front of the camera, that you're in a spotlight, and what happens is the trolls are always all around. The internet kind of amplifies and accentuates those trolls. I mean, I see you're always prepared for criticism because it's like everyone's a movie critic, right? So it's not just Taran Adarsh and Komal Nahata and Anupama Chopra or Rajiv Massan. Ye har koi yaar ye to bakwas picture hai. I mean, I know the effort that it takes for even it's 125 to 150 people have to come together for 1 year to make even a bad film. I know, and all it'll take you is 30 seconds like, yeah, bakwas. And it's brutal. And at times that criticism comes with a cricket bat. of yaar ye to, like I remember when Ananya Pandey debuted, the amount of hate. She was a like 17-year-old kid, man. It was hardcore stuff, right? The stuff that's coming at her, that house calling her a star kid, Chunky Pandey to star bhi nahi hai. I mean, what she must be going through. And when I spoke about Sushant, there's this lovely girl, incidentally from Chandigarh, actually Ambala, Riya Chakrabarti, right? So Riya was someone I found when she was 16 years old. She was a VJ on MTV, and I mean, she was dating Sushant for a while. And you look at the stuff that Riya went through after all that went down over there, the kind of, hate that came her way, all hardcore. I mean, man, to have to go to jail, I mean, no one should have to go through that. You shouldn't have to see your child go through that. So I think step one really is to seek help. I think that's fundamentally the tools that, for example, Kapil spoke about, that need to at a multi-tiered level. Just in terms of self-care, of journaling, or for that matter, community support, and then expert support. I think having seeking out that help first is to first understand that you need help, to accept that. Two, I think that community support really helps, and I think what Shivani spoke about. I think the community plays such a. At times, you just need someone from outside with a similar experience or whatever to just tell you you're going to be fine. I think that the kind of impact that has, and someone who's gone through that. At times, also बाहर से कोई बोलता है ना, बाबा सब ठीक कर देगा. So whatever that Baba is somewhere sitting, it's that. And your tools may differ. You got to seek that out. Like for example, even music, like music has a very different, the way you consume and way you receive that dramatically changes. What a song means to you would mean something very different to me, depending on the age and stage you are. Like there's this really terrible song by Mohammad Aziz. If you've heard of the singer, sorry, that's a different generation. Kavya, you will not have heard of that guy, but probably Kapil and I will relate to it. But like there's this really bhalta song, it's like, दुनिया में कितना दर्द है, मेरा दर्द कितना कम है. It's a really shitty song, but like when I heard it, I was like, man, he's thinking about me. I feel it, So it's at times, whatever your tool is, be it spiritualism, be it journaling, be it meditation, be it just getting out, going for a swim, be it talking to a friend, be it getting help, be it at times medication. I think first recognize, accept, acknowledge that you need the help. One, two. Go out and get it. Whatever it is, whatever your tools are. And unfortunately now there's a lot of resources available. I mean, something like, I wish Solh Wellness existed, a decade back, but hey, better late than never, right? I think, so get that support, get that there is no stigma, there is no harm, there is no लोग क्या सोचेंगे उसकी फिक्र मत करो, तुम अपना देखो, अपने आप को ठीक करो, and do that and get that help. I think that's really the second thing. And I think humor plays a really important role in just being able to cope with everything in life. Essentially, that's usually my firewall and my tool, my go-to for whatever else happens, be it educating people or creating awareness or be it whatever else. And I'll close this out with I think giving back, that also really helps. I think especially since you're talking about celebrities and talent, I think they play such a big role. So they play a big role in normalizing a lot of things, in stigma. I think the fact that Deepika Padukone has set up like a Live, Love, Laugh foundation, so openly talking about anxiety and panic attacks and all of that, or funding research or support groups in that space, or playing characters, diverse representation on screen. I mean, that didn't exist. I mean, forget about how well or how badly Dear Zindagi may have been done, but the fact that there's a Shah Rukh Khan, people are saying, yaar, mere ko aisa therapist chahiye. But there's a conversation that when a Alia Bhatt is talking about it, it's great. At least it starts the conversation, right or wrong, it sparks conversation. I think that's great. And there's a saying in the community, nothing about us without us. So I think just about bringing in the community in the storytelling of, I mean, otherwise it's like, five guys sitting at the table and talking about gender representation. It's like those HR that brings that cake on Women's Day and then life goes back to normal, right? It's stupid, right? वो करना उसके बजाय, I think just bringing in the community and having that happen, I think that's a really important piece. I'll close this out with just one final anecdote of sorts, of not on the celebrity side, but something that actually how I saw this play out. So we usually we loved, my wife and son love traveling, so we travel extensively, and I have no sharam of like इसको छुपा के रखो, दुनिया से दूर रखो. We travel extensively, and so we were doing this road trip across Spiti Valley, like a 17-day road trip, etc. And we had this driver going with us, And we had just had to kind of flag it off saying, listen, don't get weirded out. Rishan is on the spectrum. He may sing loudly, he may behave a certain way, but he's chill. He's great fun and he's harmless. So rightfully so, he said, sir, हाथ तो नहीं पकड़ेगा, स्टीयरिंग व्हील तो खींच नहीं लेगा. So I said, नहीं, ऐसा कुछ नहीं करेगा, लेकिन आपकी पप्पी ले सकता है. तो बेचारा घबरा गया कि वो क्या बोल रहा है. Obviously was joking. But over the period of literally 4 or 5 days, I could see that graph shifting for the driver. A simple, Yadav ji from UP, and how his graph changed. Eventually, in the next 4 or 5 days, wherever we would stop, even if it's for a horse ride, he was advocating for Rishan. So he would be telling the घोड़े वाला कि बहुत होशियार बच्चा है, लेकिन तो संभाल के लेके जाना. So I could see that graph shifting by sheer engagement. The fact that we didn't feel like यार ये इसको क्या समझाऊं मैं, इसको क्या समझ में आएगा, या फिर ये मेरे बेटे के बारे में ऐसे कैसे बोल रहा है. We chatted, we left him with him, we kind of educated him. I explained it in as simple a term as possible कि भाई कुछ लोग iPhone, iOS पे होते हैं, ये Android पे चल रहा है, तो फर्क है. तो सिर्फ वो फर्क है और कुछ नहीं है. So I think just having that conversation, normalizing those things, exposing them to that is what really essentially helps. So go out, accept if you need help, recognize that, go out and seek it, and give it a laugh. I think it'll make life easier.
I think about what you said, that you enlightened the driver about it. It's such a change that you made in a person, and that's so sweet. And when I hear about it, it's just small things that we do in life, this little enlightenment that makes a big difference. That you just did it to one person, now he's going to go and say it to other people. It's so much enlightenment that you've done. It's such a sweet thing that you did. So shall I move on to Mimansa? Ma'am, I have a question for you now.
So when we speak of communities, the question of inclusivity often pops up in our mind. And as you work in a setting like hospitals and school, in developing different skill development programs, how do you make sure that you are developing the program in an inclusive manner?
So any segment or sector of the society can exist in a holistic way without mental health. So even healthcare is in today's time, if they are looking after and including mental health and mental wellness as a core aspect, that's not there. We still struggle with that. And healthcare providers and healthcare as an organization, for doctors, they also need to talk about mental health and healthcare as an integral part. We also need to look at how we talk about this and a lot of other things also. I mean, in healthcare, for mental health to become a key aspect, needs to be looked at multiple levels. Similarly, in schools, we have been talking about life skills. We've been talking about mental health education, yet it's still not an integral part because it's tick in the box. We do certain workshops in a year. How much are they able to translate into something big? Of course, through those sessions, we are able to impact a few. And that's still an impact as I see it, but it needs to really translate into something much more. So rather than it being a tick in the box, whether it is workplace, healthcare, schools, society, I think what we need to do is just make this into a movement in the right direction, where whether it's, we're talking about media, celebrities. Of course, when a celebrity talks about mental health, is going to have a much larger impact than an expert talking to a few 100 people and going to have an impact on 100 few. So, or whether it is sports people coming from there, normalization happens from some of the people that people actually are able to influence in that sense. So, positive conversations around mental health by people who are recognized in the field, along with experts who are in the field, to be able to even normalize the treatment aspect. And the society, of course, we've been talking about community. Everybody over here has been talking about community, because what we need to also recognize is we have a dearth of mental health experts, not just in the country, but worldwide. And if I talk about India, it's more than 700% shortage of mental health experts across the country. So expertization cannot be the solution. The solution needs to be first level. What happens if you have a headache? You try and take the medication, you try and work on it. The same way, the moment you recognize you're having a problem, you recognize there is stress that you need to address. The second step, the headache continues. You try and tell somebody in the family. The same way your emotional problem continues, persist, go seek help and talk to somebody in the family, your friend, parents, teacher, whoever, in your immediate ecosystem. If it still persists and you recognize that now this headache has started to impact your functionality, your day-to-day life is getting affected. You're not being able to perform. You're not being able to sleep well. It's impacting your mood. All of that is happening. That's when you go and seek help from a doctor, the same way you go and seek help from a mental health expert. So we all have a role to play. Let's just play our roles and recognize which level we need to go where, and seek help, normalize conversations, and keep talking about it.
Yeah, it is extremely important to normalize such conversation, and I would like to thank each one of you to come up on our platform and share your thoughts about mental health. It was a wonderful and enlightening session for all of us. I would like to thank each one of you for being a part of this fiesta. Thank you so much for joining in.